Welcome everyone. I'm going to do this presentation in about 20 minutes. And the purpose of this presentation is actually to tell you a little story about a company that you must have heard of, Starbucks. And the story is about the last 10 years of this company and how they did extremely well. And then something went wrong in the company and the story of what happened thereafter. This company, ever since Howard Schultz founded it, was based on very rapid growth. And one of the mantras Howard Schultz decided upon about 10 years ago was to grow the number of outlets rapidly. His vision was that in the United States, no one in a city should have to walk for more than 5 minutes to come to a Starbucks outlet. And that's what he set out to do. Between 2003 and 2008, they nearly grew the number of outlets by 2.5 times. In this period, the sales grew rapidly. As you can see, in 2003, $4 billion to 2008, $10.38 billion. But something else was happening during this time. The revenue growth, as you can see in the red bars, and in 2008, it had dropped to about 10%. Profits were very good. As you can see from these bars, the blue bars represent the profit before tax in millions of dollars. And in 2007, they clocked as much as $1 billion on a sale of about $9 billion, which is about a little more than 11%. Profit after tax was also growing very handsomely. But then something went wrong in 2008, it would seem, when profits, both PBT and PAT, shrank precipitously. But if you look at the profitability of the company, there were signs of trouble as far back as 2006. From 2006 onward, the profitability of the company, as measured by profit before tax to sales as a ratio and profit after tax to sales as a ratio, were declining steadily. And just as in FY 2008, sales revenue had collapsed sharply, so had profitability. So what exactly were the problems in Starbucks? What was it that caused this iconic company to start doing badly all of a sudden, apparently all of a sudden? One, it seems that the number of stores that were growing so rapidly had begun to cannibalize each other. In fact, between 2006 and 2008, they measured the same store sales and found that it had dropped 10%. Because the stores were so close to each other, they began to attract a new segment of customers that was not their original target segment. Let's call them the takeaway segment. This takeaway segment was a kind of customer that was on its way to work or on its way home after work or took a short time during the lunch break, and they would come over to quickly grab a steaming cup of coffee or the bus station or to the car park. These people was, and the way Starbucks used to operate, which was to offer premium coffees to people who would sit down and enjoy the coffee experience. By focusing on the takeaway segment, Starbucks began to weaken value delivery to their core customers. In order to serve the takeaway segment, they began to automate coffee delivery because takeaway segment customers were not willing to wait. So they needed coffee to be brewed very, very quickly. They stopped grinding fresh coffee beans as they used to. They began to introduce flavor-locked packaging for coffee, and that began to dilute the rich coffee aroma that was always in the air in a Starbucks outlet. And in order to grow the top line, Howard Schultz himself began to introduce new products and services, such as you could hear a lot of music and cut a CD sitting in the Starbucks outlet of a set of numbers that you could select from across different albums. They introduced Wi-Fi, they introduced different kinds of merchandise, such as even teddy bears you could buy and take home. In this process, in this desire and the chase to raise revenue, they began to lose focus on customers. And as they say, that because of this drive to increase top line, they began to lose their identity, and some call it the McDonaldization of Starbucks. This is the 10-year history of their share price, and as you can see, from the very beginning, way back in 2001 onwards, they had been handsomely ahead of the NASDAQ. They had outperformed the share price index very, very well. However, from 2007 onwards, a precipitous decline began to take place. In other words, the markets were beginning to punish Starbucks. So here is Starbucks, an iconic company which had always had remarkable all-round performance, profitability well above 10%. And they continued this remarkable all-round performance as long as they served their core customers. And they obtained handsome revenue growth, improvement in profitability, and market capitalization. However, once they began to pay attention to incompatible segments, such as the takeaway segment that I mentioned to you, it began to weaken service delivery to core customers. And they were unable to leverage this additional new segment for profitability. And that is why markets punished the company for losing their way. In February 2007, Howard Schultz, founder, chairman, and CEO, wrote a memo to his top management pointing out what he thought was a problem with Starbucks. And this is what he wrote. As you can see, by February he had begun to figure out what the core problem in the company was. And he himself says that it was because they were beginning to commoditize the Starbucks brand. Prabhakar, what do you think?
You know, Mr. Bhattacharya and ladies and gentlemen, Starbucks is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And if you look at the way they have grown over the last, excuse me, the way they have grown over the last several years, some of the lessons from what Mr. Bhattacharya has spoken about, how Starbucks seems to have or seem to have lost its way, are equally applicable to businesses of all sizes. Whether you're a startup, or whether you're a young emerging business, or whether you're a company with maybe doing about $5 million or $10 million in revenues with stable customers and stable revenues. The importance of focusing on your core market, the importance of serving your core customers, whoever they are, depending on whatever business you are in. Now that importance is valid and relevant irrespective of whether you're a multi-billion-dollar company or whether you're a young emerging company. So the important takeaway for us from here is that if you drift or stray from the core customers who have supported, patronized you, and whom you started out to service, and in the interest of rapid growth, if you start diluting focus on the market, very soon, no matter what business you're in, very soon you're likely to come to a situation where you will either be punished by the markets. Now I can understand that young and emerging businesses are probably not listed businesses, but being punished by markets, the equivalent is creating a company which is not attractive to investors. Now, when you lose sight of the market you're servicing, it's very hard for you to attract investors in your business. And you will also find that a company which essentially loses its way about servicing its customers will find it difficult to attract the right kind of employee talent as well. And when you cannot attract the right kind of investors and the right kind of employees, it's very hard for you to retain your customers. So that is one of the significant takeaways from the story which Mr. Bhattacharya is reciting about Starbucks. Stay focused on your core customers in the interest of growth. Do not be seduced by what seems to be an opportunity in some other area unless you have thoroughly researched that area and unless you understand what you're getting into. Mr. Bhattacharya?
Very appropriate. Thank you. This part of the story now as it unfolds is what happened to Starbucks after FY 2008. In 2008, the board invited Howard Schultz, who had sort of stepped aside and left the management of the company to professionals, to return as the CEO. There were 4 key things he did in the years that followed. One of them was to cut $600 million in expenses across the company. Remember, 2008, the downturn had begun to hit. Recession had begun to bite in the United States, as well as in most parts of the Western world. The second thing he did was to stop store expansion. In fact, he closed 1,000 stores across the world, most of them in the United States. He refocused employees' attention on identifying and serving the core customers. He dropped a number of food items, he stopped the music production business, and he removed a number of items of merchandise such as teddy bears and so on and so forth. And the stores went back to grinding fresh beans. This is a machine behind which you see Howard Schultz himself. This machine was developed and designed in 2008-2009, which was smaller in height and could be kept on the counter, and yet customers could see the barista behind the machine. While serving the takeaway segment, the size of this machine had grown so large that customers couldn't see the face of the barista and therefore had difficulty in striking up a conversation. So it cost the company, the stores, or the customers the intimate experience that they enjoyed having with the barista. Prabhakar?
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very interesting picture of the CEO of Howard Schultz standing by a coffee maker while a small quantum of coffee is being brewed. This is actually, in my opinion, some kind of, it's very symbolic that a company which had lost its way with its customers now realized that their original customer base primarily came to them because of what Mr. Bhattacharya said a short while ago, that intimate experience with the person at the counter preparing the coffee. Now, as the company grew, they lost that intimacy. So it was like a very depersonalized kind of experience. And over a period of time, as we have seen from the data which Mr. Bhattacharya has laid out, Starbucks suffered. So this, we look at this as a very, very important picture where the company realized that it has to go back to its basics. It has to go back to the original idea, with which Starbucks started off. That is, to give customers an intimate experience. Now, in your own businesses, it's quite possible that your business may have grown to an extent where you're not in a position to stay in touch with your customers. That's always a big mistake. Now, whether you're the CEO or whether you're the sales manager of your enterprise, if you do not take time off to reconnect with your basic principal customers, and if you lose that intimacy, then somebody else will come and slowly take away your business. So that's the important takeaway from this particular picture, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Prabhakar. Thank you. And Starbucks went back to giving customers the in-store coffee experience which Starbucks was known for. Between 2008 and 2009 and 2010, as I said to you before, they halted the expansion of stores. And as you can see, the number of stores remained more or less the same. the focus went back on doing what they used to do best in the stores rather than merely grow the numbers. You've seen the results up to 2008. In 2009, because partly of the recession and because they were doing a number of things to set things right, turnover dropped again. The growth rate actually went down to minus 5.6. But in 2010, it jumped back. What is more interesting is in the subsequent slides in terms of the profit of the company. The profit of the company, which during 2008 and 2009 had come sharply down. In 2009 it recovered a little, but look at the way it went in 2010. It is almost as if the dip had never happened. Profit before tax to sales, as well as profit after tax to sales, have been the best ever in the history of the company. And all of this has happened while the share market has rewarded the company for going back to basics. Look at the way the share prices have risen during between 2009 and 2010, even when NASDAQ has remained essentially flat. There are very important lessons from this, and one of them is what Howard Schultz talks about. And this is an important lesson for all businesses which confuse growth with profitability. Prabhakar, would you like to add something here?
Yes, there are two very important points, and one is I'd like to reflect on an experience we had when we were running our startup, RealQ Software. Now, RealQ Software was focused only on software testing. We set up the company in 1997 when there was an explosion in the number of startups in India, but most of the companies were focused on software development. Web services were coming into their own and so on, whereas we focused on software testing and software testing alone. As we went along, there was a lot of temptation for us to get into software development as well, because of some internal arrogance which we had, that if we can test a piece of software and deliver it to a customer, making sure it works the way the customer intended, maybe we have the competence and capability to develop software as well. And at that point in time, there were a lot of large IT companies which started looking at testing as an independent source of revenue. So since they were looking at testing as a source of revenue, there was a lot of temptation internally to get into development. Now, we probably took on one or two little projects, but then we realized that that was a big mistake, because we were going to be competing with an Infosys or TCS or XYZ, whereas we used to go to the market and tell people that we are very good at testing, whereas companies like Infosys and TCS do testing as an additional business. Now, the important point was we resisted the temptation to get into development, and we stayed focused on what we were doing. But then we started expanding within testing into other areas. We were doing testing of certain kinds of enterprise applications and banking and financial services applications, and we moved to testing of games and other areas. So there were opportunities in testing in other areas itself. So the important point here is, as an entrepreneur from the rest of the world, is your willingness to take chances, risks, and experiment. It's very important to experiment and try and find out new sources of revenue, ladies and gentlemen, whatever be your business and whatever be the stage of your business. And in experimenting, you will always make some mistakes. But what's important is your ability to pull back at the right time, knowing fully well something is not working. So if you look at what Howard Schultz says, that growth is not a strategy, it was a tactic. The important thing is try and find new sources of growth without defocusing on your market, but know when to pull back. Growth for growth's sake itself is never a great idea. So what I would very strongly recommend based on my own experience and the experiences of interacting with other mentors and other SMEs and large companies is that experiment, look for new opportunities, but know when to pull back. And always stay focused on your existing market. There are a lot of opportunities you can probably uncover within the market segment you are addressing. But do not give up experimentation. As I said, please know when to pull back. Mr. Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Prabhakar. Yeah, thank you. And I want to give you an example of a client of mine, a mid-sized company. A year and a half ago when I became engaged with them, they had been growing at about 35% year on year. In 3 years' time, they had more than doubled their turnover. But one of the problems that they had been facing was nearly zero profitability. They and their board had operated under the assumption that if they continued to grow the top line, then they would be able to buy raw materials cheaper. That the top line would mean that existing costs and expenses will get spread over a larger turnover, and that would automatically spur them to profits. It didn't. Those assumptions were fallacious. And about a year and a half ago, the board reassessed the situation and agreed to focus on profitability and said, we would like to continue growing rapidly. However, we would put profitability first. And in the very first year when they changed this philosophy, they made a profit of approximately 3.5% on turnover. And the principal reason behind this is that you cannot be successful if you try to please everybody. No company, no human being, no enterprise, no organization can be everything to everyone. Bill Cosby, one of the most, if he is not as famous as Tom Cruise perhaps, but Bill Cosby is a highly regarded and extremely well-respected actor, and some of you may have seen him in this long time ago TV serial called Different Strokes. And so Bill Cosby is a very wise man, and what he said about probably for Hollywood actors, I think holds true for enterprises and businesses as well. Thank you.